All right, welcome film fans to today's video, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1956 classic. Now, this video, let me turn down that dramatic music. Now, this video is supplemental to the PowerPoint. So basically, I'm just going to narrate the PowerPoint, but if you need to go back and look at things a little longer or a little bit more in detail, please do that. So we have viewed or will view Invasion of the Body Snatchers in class. So let's talk a little bit about this film. Released in 1956, this science fiction B-movie directed by Don Siegel is an effective thriller, slowly building tension to its climactic conclusion. Now, a B-movie is just kind of like a low-budget film. A lot of the films, and particularly science fiction back in the 1950s, were considered B-movies just because they didn't have like big-name stars and they didn't have big budgets, things like that. But some of them are still considered classics, and a lot of people are fans of B-movies just because, sometimes they're a little cheesy or they're a little bit over the top, but still effective, and some, like this one, is considered a classic. The film is originally based on a three-part serial story written by Jack Finney that first appeared in a science fiction magazine. Again, science fiction magazines were pretty popular. They had like short stories, and this particular one was expanded into a novel, and then it was made into a film. And in fact, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a film. If you do a little bit more research, you'll find that it's been made several different times in Hollywood in different versions. Now, this film is known for its theme of the political size film. It's open to a variety of interpretations, including paranoia towards the spread of a harmful ideology, like belief system, such as socialistic communism, or the sweeping mass hysteria of McCarthyism in the 1950s, and the blacklisting of Hollywood filmmakers, and the spread of a hostile germ. So in this case, this hostile germ is like a alien seed pod. And it also represents the loss of our individuality and emotion through group conformity, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. The main plot of this film revolves around, again, an alien dehumanization that occurs through an invasion by seed pods from outer space. And this idea kind of mirrors the fears of a communist takeover, where slowly people are turning into communist or becoming communist sympathizers. Again, it's really an allegory or a metaphor for that idea. Some of the historical context, what's going on in the 1950s, like we've discussed before, and you can check this out in more detail. When you click on these links, it'll give you more information. But of course, the US and NATO was involved in the Korean War. Obviously, we had the Communist Red Scare going on and McCarthyism. And again, click on these links. Spend some time looking through this information. It's pretty interesting. We talked about the Soviet satellite Sputnik, and I cover a lot of this in my Cold War Origins PowerPoint, so check that out as well. Some of the cultural, pop culture, like Elvis Presley dominating the airwaves, and rock and roll really was born in the 1950s. And then here's a good summary also. It's a Wikipedia page, but it does do a great job of summarizing main events, cultural, pop culture references, fads, etc. So check out that link, the United States in the 1950s. And of course, go back to the Cold War Origin slideshow for more information, which is on Classroom. Here is the trailer to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm not going to play it right now, but again, if you're on the PowerPoint version, you can check that out yourself. It's just a interesting, classic trailer. It's got a lot of the similarities that a lot of these trailers from the 50s had. Dramatic music, overlapping commentary, and so forth. All right, so Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, as I've mentioned before, many science fiction films during the 1950s were allegories for the fear of communism and the atomic age, like 1954's Godzilla. An allegory, remember, is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one, and many people see that in this film. It's been said that this film is an allegory for communist-driven Red Scare of the 1950s and McCarthyism. The traits of being one of them, the aliens, in the film is being a cold, unable to express emotion or closeness with anyone. And remember, without emotion, individuality is lost and everyone becomes the same. It's hard to tell anyone apart. We lose our uniqueness as humans, and that's kind of the allegory for being a communist. Remember, loss of emotion equals loss of human desires, wants, and needs, which in turn equals the foundations of communism, where everyone is equal and the same. Again, you got to kind of open up, look outside the box with this metaphor, but that's kind of what they were going at back in the 50s. Fear of invasion leads to mass hysteria. In this film, the 1950s communist Red Scare and McCarthyism fears are also portrayed as mass hysteria. People start believing their friends and relatives are changing into something different, such as someone turning into a communist, or if you're being accused of being a communist, you know, you might as well be one, because that's just as dangerous. And in particular, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, we're going to focus on three themes: paranoia, conformity, and what's known as alienation, or being alienated, separated from the mass. All right, so let's take a look at these in more detail. You've got paranoia, the thought process believed to be heavily influenced by anxiety or fear, often to the point of irrationality and delusion, such as accusing and believing everyone is a communist when there's no hard evidence to support the claim. You've got conformity, a type of social influence involving a change in belief or behavior in order to fit in with a group. So giving in to peer pressure, changing your values and morals to fit in with a larger group, to be accepted by others so you conform to their beliefs, whether it's right or wrong. And then alienation, or to be alienated, to cause to lose feelings of love, loyalty, or attachment, to cause to be withdrawn or diverted. So in this instance, it's to be pushed out of a community or society. You know, one day you're part of humanity and you're part of that community, but all of a sudden things change and now you're no longer accepted and you're kind of the outsider of the situation. You're going to see that in this film. Okay, spoiler alert. This just means that hopefully you've seen the film. If you proceed forward, I'm going to be talking about things that happen in the film, and hopefully you've already viewed it. But some examples of paranoia seen in the film, if you recall some of these scenes, Miles, the main character, he talks about sick people who couldn't wait to see me because he's a doctor. Then suddenly they were perfectly all right. A boy who said his mother wasn't his mother. A woman who said her uncle wasn't her uncle. Okay, so various characters claiming loved ones aren't who they seem to be. They go to sleep and wake up a different person. Wilma, that's this character here, believes her uncle Ira is not her uncle. And then if you remember the scene where they run into Dr. Kaufman, he's asking, Miles is asking, what do you think's going on? And Dr. Kaufman responds, you know, a strange neurosis, evidently contagious, an epidemic of mass hysteria. In 2 weeks, it spread all over town. What causes it? Worry about what's going on in the world, probably. And then Miles, jokingly, hoping they won't catch it, you know, he basically says, I'd hate to wake up some morning and find out that you weren't you. And that's obviously a little bit of foreshadowing. Some examples of conformity. Paranoia. Paranoid people soon accept the situation. If you recall, all of a sudden, the people who were worried about their loved ones no longer are quite worried about them. The boy is no longer concerned about his mother, and Wilma admits her mistake to Miles about her uncle's identity. You see that scene where she's like, oh, I was mistaken. I'm paraphrasing. But, you know, everything seems to be okay. But we soon learn that Wilma, has conformed and become one of them, the aliens. And if you also remember, there's a scene where Miles is looking inside of a house where the pod people are meeting. You hear a baby crying, and a seed pod is taken to the room, and the mom says, no more tears for that baby. And remember, the most human of all sounds, like a baby crying, will disappear forever because that baby will be changed into one of them. So again, paranoid people soon accept the situation. They give into the change that's happening, and that's where you see that theme of conformity, conforming to the larger mass. Another one is this speech by Dr. Kaufman. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically he's talking about how the seed pods came out of the sky. They came from space. They had the power to reproduce themselves to an exact likeness of any life form. Your new bodies are growing in there. They're taking over you, over cell for cell, atom for atom. And then he goes on to explain there's no pain. Suddenly, while you're asleep, they absorb your minds, your memories. You're reborn into an untroubled world. Tomorrow, you'll be one of us. There's no need for love, desire, ambition, faith. And, basically it's kind of like what they're trying to say is if you are a communist, then everyone's the same. I know it's a little far-fetched, but that's kind of the main theme here. Miles reluctantly replies, what a world that would be. Okay, so again, you see that theme of conformity where everyone's kind of changing and being the same. There's no individuality. Examples of alienation, I love this picture here, but Miles and Becky, they were once part of the community, accepted by everyone. But if you see what happens in the film, they're now singled out by the pod people. They have now become alienated. They are chased and no longer part of the community or the majority. Now they are different. They are the aliens in society. Miles is soon seen as the crazy one, alienated from the norm of society. And again, at the beginning, the pod people were the minority and alienated from the community, but soon they grow in numbers and begin to take over the community. Normal society is now alienated from the pod people. Miles fights the alien control and he appeals to his friends only to be betrayed by them because, of course, they are turning into a pod person. He turns to the law only to be pursued by them. He turns to the system only to be trapped in it. All have betrayed him by becoming pod people and giving up their individuality and ability to choose. All right, so in reality, those accused of being a communist are automatically alienated from society. They've already been singled out and labeled, whether they were guilty or not. That's kind of that metaphor there. All right, so in conclusion, you're next. Feeding the fears. So examining the film, you can see some of the connections to real fears of communism in society and themes of this story. So you sleep as yourself, but you wake up as a duplicate of yourself. No emotion, feeling, fear, joy, love, etc. It's a world without worry or emotion, but these are important human characteristics that no longer exist. So, in theory, you are not human if you don't have emotions. So this is a reflection on the fears of communism where choice is not regarded as important. No need for people to have wants, needs, or desires. In theory, everything is controlled by the government, so freedom of choice is not needed. At the end, when Miles stands in the street yelling at cars passing by, he looks into the camera and screams, "You're next!" And that's where he kind of breaks the fourth wall talking to the audience, and it's a pretty effective ending. Miles is also trying to contain the spread of the pod people, remember, much like containing the spread of communism. So that's the end of this video, and of course the end of the film was a little bit more optimistic. The original ending didn't have that tagged on scene where they get a hold of the authorities and the FBI. It was a little bit more ambiguous with what was going to happen, but the happier ending is they're able to apparently cut off the invasion. But that's the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.